on the evening of May 7th, 1818. Penelope Warriner learned that a duchess could be insulted without anyone raising a voice. Avelden House glittered beneath chandeliers and beeswax candles, every polished surface reflecting rank, wealth, and the careful cruelty of people who knew exactly where everyone belonged. Penelope stood beside her husband, beneath the gilt arch between the drawing-room and dining-room, dressed in pale blue silk and wearing the composure she had perfected during 13 months as Duchess of Chalfont. Across the room, the Avelden steward consulted a folded memorandum before arranging the order in which the guests would go in to dinner. Penelope noticed the paper because he looked at it twice, his expression tightening the second time. A deep crease divided the sheet down its center, and a faint reddish stain marked one lower corner where wine had apparently touched it. Then Lady Sophia Dacre crossed toward him and spoke too softly for Penelope to hear. Sophia was 30, elegant without softness, and carried herself with the easy confidence of a woman who had spent her life believing that social rooms would rearrange themselves for her comfort. She glanced toward Penelope only once. That glance was enough. A moment later, the steward began calling the procession. Horace Dacre, Earl of Avelden, offered his arm to the highest-ranking lady present after Penelope. Another pair moved forward. Then Sophia stepped into place ahead of Penelope. Conversation thinned, not stopped. Society rarely granted its victims the mercy of complete silence. Instead, voices lowered just enough to make attention unmistakable. Penelope did not move. A duchess preceded an earl's unmarried sister. Everyone in the room knew it. Sophia knew it. The steward knew it. Penelope saw him look down at the folded memorandum again, as if hoping ink might change under pressure. Stephen saw it too. Her husband had been speaking to an older officer near the mantel. But his head turned at the precise instant Sophia extended her hand toward the gentleman assigned to escort her. Stephen crossed the room before Penelope could decide whether dignity required protest or indifference. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Her Grace precedes you, Lady Sophia." Sophia paused. Her smile remained perfect. "Of course. How foolish of me. There must have been some confusion." "There wasn't," Stephen said. The room became still enough for Penelope to hear the small click of the steward folding the memorandum. Stephen looked at the man, then at Sophia. "My wife will go in according to her rank." For one sharp, dangerous second, Penelope felt something warm move beneath the humiliation. Not gratitude. She had learned to distrust gratitude inside her marriage. Something closer to being seen. Stephen had defended her before she asked. He had noticed what others might have pretended not to notice. Yet even as he offered his arm and escorted her forward, his face returned to the controlled reserve she knew too well. Penelope rested her gloved fingertips upon his sleeve because ceremony demanded it, not because intimacy did. There had been many such touches in their marriage. Formal, correct, almost empty. She had spent 13 months trying not to measure what was missing. Dinner proceeded beneath painted ceilings and ancestral portraits, with silver gleaming between flowers and crystal. Sophia recovered beautifully. She laughed at the right moments, spoke warmly to Penelope across the table, and even expressed concern that the steward might be overworked. Penelope watched the man's face when he heard it. He lowered his eyes. Horace steered conversation toward Waterloo, veterans, and obligations that respectable men owed to the dead. Penelope felt Stephen become quieter beside her. Colonel Hollingworth had died more than 2 years earlier, but his name still changed something in Stephen's posture. Her father had saved Stephen's life at Waterloo. That much Penelope knew. She also knew Stephen had afterward ensured that she never lacked money, introductions, or protection. What she had never understood was why he had married her. His proposal had been restrained, almost grave. He had asked. She had accepted. There had been no declaration worthy of a romance, but there had been steadiness in his gaze that she had once foolishly believed might deepen into tenderness. After dinner, the ladies withdrew, and later the company mingled again between the drawing-room and card-room. Penelope escaped for several minutes to speak with an elderly widow near the music stand. When the conversation ended, she remembered that she had left her fan upon a small table near the card-room doorway. She crossed the corridor alone. Voices reached her before she entered. Horace was speaking. "You cannot mean to spend the rest of your life defending every slight against her." Penelope stopped. The card-room door stood partly open. She could see neither man clearly from where she stood, only the edge of a green baize table and Stephen's dark sleeve. "She is my wife," Stephen said. "Yes. Everyone knows what she is. What no one understands is why." Horace laughed softly. "Hollingworth dragged you out of hell in Belgium, and suddenly his daughter became a duchess. Very honourable, very expensive." Penelope's fingers tightened around nothing. Stephen said nothing. Horace continued. "Does gratitude sustain a marriage, Chalfont? Or do you intend to spend 40 years pretending? Affection because a dead colonel once saved your life." There was a pause long enough for Penelope to hear the shuffle of cards somewhere deeper in the room. She should have walked away. Pride told her to move. Something more desperate held her still. Stephen's answer came level and cold. "I only tolerate her for her father's sake." The words did not sound angry. That made them worse. Anger might have been regretted. Anger might have distorted truth. Stephen sounded as calm as he had when correcting Sophia's place in the dinner procession. Penelope felt the two moments strike against each other. He had defended her rank because she was his duchess. He tolerated the woman because her father had earned the trouble. Horace murmured something she did not hear. Penelope stepped back before either man could see her. Her heartbeat seemed indecently loud, but her face remained composed. Years of being a gentleman's daughter had taught her that pain became more dangerous when witnessed. 13 months as a duchess had perfected the lesson. She returned to the drawing-room by another door. Sophia looked up as Penelope entered. Their eyes met. Sophia's expression was courteous, almost sympathetic. Penelope understood then that the insult before dinner had not merely been about precedence. Sophia had been testing whether Penelope's place beside the Duke had substance behind it. Penelope had believed Stephen's intervention answered the question. Now she knew better. She remained for another 20 minutes because leaving immediately would have announced injury. She spoke to Lady Morton about a subscription concert. She thanked Horace for dinner. She even inclined her head to Sophia with perfect civility. Stephen appeared at her side when their carriage was called. "You're tired," he said quietly. "A little. We can go." "Yes." He looked at her more closely, but whatever he saw did not tell him the truth. Penelope was grateful for that. In the carriage back to Grosvenor Square, Stephen sat opposite her rather than beside her. London lamps passed beyond the windows, appearing and vanishing across his face. He asked whether Sophia's mistake had upset her. "No," Penelope said. It was not entirely a lie. Sophia's insult had become almost trivial. Stephen seemed to accept the answer, at Chalfont House, he wished her good night with the same grave courtesy he had offered every night of their marriage. Penelope went upstairs alone. Her maid had already turned down the bed. On the dressing table lay the small calfskin Book of Common Prayer that had belonged to Colonel Hollingworth. Its cover was worn smooth at the edges, its brass clasp dented, her father's initials still visible on the flyleaf inside. Penelope stood before it without touching it. Her father had been dead since January 1816. Yet somehow his courage at Waterloo had entered her marriage before she had. She had spent 13 months wondering whether Stephen might someday look at her and see more than responsibility. Tonight, he had given her the answer. Penelope lifted her gaze to the mirror. Her face was pale, but her shoulders were straight. She would not beg for an explanation from a man who believed endurance was generosity. She would not remain in a house where comfort was purchased with humiliation. When her maid returned from the adjoining room, Penelope turned from the prayer book and spoke with such calm that the young woman stopped in the doorway. "Pack only what is mine." Penelope did not raise her voice, and that frightened her maid more than tears would have. The young woman looked from Penelope to the open wardrobe, then back again, waiting for some sign that the command had been spoken in anger and might be withdrawn. None came. "Your Grace, do you mean tonight?" "Tonight." Penelope crossed to the dressing table and opened the small jewelry case. Stephen had given her shortly after their wedding. Pearls, diamonds, and a sapphire parure caught the candlelight. They belonged to the Duchess of Chalfont more than they belonged to Penelope Warriner. She closed the lid without touching them. "Leave those." Her maid hesitated. "All of them?" "All the Chalfont jewels. Pack only the things that were mine before I married, and the clothing bought for my personal use. Nothing that could be mistaken for property I'm carrying away in spite." "Yes, Your Grace." The maid moved quickly after that, perhaps relieved to have instructions she could obey. Penelope removed her earrings and set them beside the locked case. Her wedding ring remained on her finger. She looked at it for several seconds. Taking it off would have been dramatic, and she felt no desire for drama. The marriage had not ceased because her heart had changed shape in a card-room doorway. She was still Stephen's wife. She simply refused to remain under his roof while believing herself an obligation he endured for another man's memory. The ring stayed where it was. Penelope crossed to the prayer book and lifted it carefully. The calfskin cover was warm from the room. Her father's initials rested beneath her thumb when she opened the flyleaf. Colonel Hollingworth had written his name, with the firm hand she remembered from childhood, before illness and age had weakened it. He had never spoken to her of bargains. Never once had he told her that Stephen owed her a future. He had admired the Duke, certainly. He had trusted him, but if he had arranged anything beyond that trust, he had taken the knowledge to his grave. Penelope closed the book and placed it inside the smaller traveling case herself. She would not leave it behind. 2-day dresses, she said, the grey walking dress, the dark green wool. Enough linen for a fortnight. My correspondence box. No evening jewels. Her maid stopped with a folded gown in her hands. "Are we going far?" "No." Penelope surprised herself with how steady the answer sounded. Bedford Place, Mrs. Miriam Frobisher had been her mother's sister, and, in Penelope's childhood, the safest person in any room. Widowed for nearly 15 years, she occupied a respectable house in Bloomsbury with 2 maids, a footman too elderly for ambition, and opinions strong enough to survive any drawing-room in London. Penelope had not sent word. At this hour, there was no time to wait for permission, without allowing Stephen a chance to discover what she intended. Yet she knew her aunt would receive her. More importantly, society knew Mrs. Frobisher was respectable. Penelope could leave her husband's house without vanishing into scandalous uncertainty. That distinction mattered. She was angry enough to go. She was not angry enough to become careless. The maid lowered her voice. "Will His Grace know where you are?" Penelope looked toward the bedroom door. Beyond it lay corridors she had learned by habit, rooms where she had arranged dinners and received callers, a morning room, where Stephen had once left a book open because she had remarked that she wished to read it. He had remembered the title. He had remembered how she took her tea. He knew she disliked overly sweet perfumes and preferred to ride before Hyde Park became crowded. Tiny attentions. That was what made the truth so cruel. For 13 months, she had mistaken observation for affection, because she had wanted affection badly enough to build it from scraps. "The housekeeper will be told," she said. "No one is to suggest that I have disappeared." The maid gave a small nod. Penelope turned away before the girl could see how much that word hurt. Disappeared. She had been disappearing by degrees for a year, she thought. Not from society. Society saw the Duchess of Chalfont clearly enough. She wore the right gowns, stood in the correct place, and was announced with the proper title. It was Penelope who had faded inside those formalities. She had become expert at asking nothing, because Stephen always gave what duty required before she could ask. He provided comfort, protection, respectability, and courtesy. He had never been cruel to her. Until tonight, she had believed that absence of cruelty might eventually grow into love. That belief had been the private foolishness she protected most carefully. She sat at the writing desk and pulled a sheet of paper toward her. For one moment, she considered leaving Stephen a note. The pen hovered over the page. What could she write? "You wounded me." He already knew what he had said, even if he did not know she had heard. Please explain. She could not bear to invite a kinder version of the same truth. Come after me. That would turn departure into a test, and Penelope refused to make one. If he came, it must be because he chose to understand what his words had done, not because she left instructions for repentance. She set the pen down. The page remained blank. By 11 o'clock, 2 modest trunks and the smaller traveling case stood ready. Penelope changed from her dinner gown into the dark green wool dress and a traveling cloak. The simplicity of the clothes steadied her. She no longer looked like a woman attending an earl's supper. She looked like someone going somewhere by her own decision. Before leaving her rooms, she opened the wardrobe once more and checked that no Chalfont jewel had been packed. The diamond necklace she had worn to the Queen's birthday celebration remained in its case. The emerald brooch Stephen's grandmother had worn remained in its velvet drawer. Nothing accompanied her that could later be described as an act of spite. Only what was hers. Downstairs, the housekeeper appeared in a wrapper hastily concealed beneath a respectable shawl, alarm plain in her face. "Your Grace," Penelope kept her voice low. "I am going to Mrs. Frobisher's house in Bedford Place. You will tell His Grace in the morning that I am safe and that I went there of my own accord." "In the morning?" "Yes." The housekeeper glanced toward the staircase, and Penelope understood the question she was too disciplined to ask. "Do not wake him," Penelope said. "There is no emergency. There is no danger." "Will your Grace be returning tomorrow?" For the first time that night, Penelope's composure nearly failed. She looked toward the dark passage leading to Stephen's study. A strip of light showed beneath the door. He was awake, perhaps reading correspondence, perhaps thinking about Horace Dacre, perhaps not thinking about his wife at all. Penelope's hand tightened around the handle of her traveling case, the prayer book resting inside beneath folded linen. I don't know. The contraction slipped naturally into the quiet, and somehow the human weakness of it steadied her more than any formal answer could have done. The housekeeper bowed. No servant was sent to Stephen. No footman ran through the house with scandal. A carriage was brought around quietly, and Penelope's 2 trunks were secured behind it. She stepped outside just before midnight. May air touched her face, cooler than the rooms she had left behind. Her maid climbed in after her. The carriage door shut. Penelope did not look back immediately. Only when the wheels began to move did she turn toward the window and see Chalfont House receding behind iron railings and lamplight. She had loved Stephen. The admission came without protection now. She had loved him in the unspoken way one loves a man who notices which chair one prefers and still never chooses to sit close. She had loved him enough to hope that restraint was depth, that distance was fear, that every small act of care concealed something he had not yet learned to say. Perhaps that was why she could not stay. A woman could survive being unloved. She could not survive indefinitely by inventing love where a man had plainly named obligation. Penelope lowered her gaze to her wedding ring. She did not remove it. She did not touch it either. Bedford Place lay ahead, unfamiliar only in the sense that she had never gone there as a wife who had left her husband's house. The future beyond that door was uncertain. For the first time in 13 months, uncertainty felt cleaner than comfort. When the carriage turned into Bloomsbury and slowed before Mrs. Frobisher's darkened house, Penelope drew one careful breath. Then she stepped down before anyone could persuade her that dignity required remaining where she had ceased to feel wanted. Stephen Warriner understood that his wife was gone before the housekeeper finished speaking. Morning light had barely reached the breakfast room when he looked across the table and found Penelope's place untouched. Her cup had not been set out. No folded newspaper rested beside her plate. The small arrangement of early roses she had ordered the previous afternoon stood between 2 empty chairs, absurdly cheerful in the silence. Stephen had spent 13 months believing he preferred quiet. Only now did he understand that the quiet of Chalfont House had never been empty while Penelope was in it. He set down the letter he had not read and rang once. The housekeeper appeared within moments, her face composed but grave. "Her Grace left shortly before midnight, Your Grace." Stephen rose. The movement was so abrupt that the chair struck the carpet behind him. "Left for where?" "Mrs. Frobisher's house in Bedford Place." The answer stopped something cold before it could become panic. Penelope had not vanished. She had gone to a respectable relative in London with her maid. She had made certain he could know she was safe. Even in leaving him, she had prevented chaos. Was she alone? Her maid accompanied her. 2 trunks and a traveling case went with them. Did she leave a message? Only that Your Grace should be told this morning that she was safe and that she went of her own accord. Stephen stared at the roses. Of her own accord. The phrase sounded deliberate enough to contain an accusation. Who knows? The footman who loaded the luggage, the coachman, Mrs. Turner from the upper floor, and myself. No one is to describe it as desertion, flight, or scandal. His voice hardened before he could soften it. Her Grace is staying with her aunt. That is all any servant in this house knows. The housekeeper inclined her head. Yes, Your Grace. Stephen almost ordered the carriage immediately. Instead, he stopped. The instinct to act came easily. Action had saved men on battlefields. Action settled estates, silenced creditors, corrected insult, moved servants and horses and money into whatever arrangement necessity required. Penelope had not left because he had failed to arrange something. She had left because of him. "Have my carriage brought around in half an hour," he said, "and send no message ahead." Bedford Place looked smaller than Chalfont House, but there was nothing diminished about the woman who received him there. Mrs. Miriam Frobisher stood in her front drawing room wearing black silk and an expression that suggested dukes were no more alarming than badly behaved nephews. She gave Stephen the bow his rank required and nothing warmer. "Penelope will see you," she said. "I'll remain in the morning room next door. The door stays open." Of course, her eyes sharpened slightly, perhaps because he had not objected. She slept very little. Stephen's jaw tightened. "Is she ill?" "No, hurt isn't the same as ill, Your Grace." Mrs. Frobisher turned away before he could answer. Penelope entered moments later. She wore the dark green wool dress from the previous night, though the traveling cloak was gone. Her hair was arranged simply. Her wedding ring remained on her hand. Stephen saw that first and despised himself for the relief it gave him. Then he saw the shadows beneath her eyes. "Penelope, Your Grace." He had never hated his title before, not until she used it like a closed door. "I came as soon as I knew where you were. I made certain you would know." Yes, he remained standing until she sat. Only then did he take the chair opposite her. The distance between them was scarcely 6 feet. It felt greater than the miles between London and any battlefield he had survived. "I need to understand why you left." Her gaze held his. No tears, no accusation. That composure hurt more than anger would have. "Do you?" "Yes." "You were very clear." Stephen went still. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. He remembered Horace in the card room. He remembered the green baize table, the half-empty glass near Horace's hand, the irritation that had risen when another man treated his marriage as an object of amusement. He remembered choosing the coldest answer available because anything warmer would have exposed something he had never learned to speak aloud. He had not known. Penelope stood close enough to hear. "You heard me, every word that mattered." "Penelope, what I said to Avilden was—" "Please don't." She did not raise her voice. Not yet. Stephen closed his mouth. She looked almost surprised that he obeyed. The expression vanished quickly. "I didn't come here to punish you," she continued. "And I didn't leave so you would follow me and say something kinder. Then why?" "Because I can't remain in a marriage while wondering whether every courtesy I receive is repayment for something my father did." He wanted to tell her then. The truth pressed against his teeth. Colonel Hollingworth had never demanded a marriage. He had never hinted at one. Stephen himself had chosen Penelope. He had watched her across 3 drawing rooms, admired the steadiness with which she cared for a dying father, remembered the quiet humor that appeared when she forgot to be guarded, and finally asked her to become his wife because the idea of another man asking first had become intolerable. But Penelope's shoulders were rigid. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. If he poured all of that into the room now, it would sound like panic. Worse, it might sound like a duke rewriting his own cruelty because consequences had arrived. She rose. The lace at the edge of her sleeve caught on a small carved projection at the back of the chair. Stephen moved before thought. His hand lifted toward the fabric. Then he stopped. Penelope noticed. Her eyes dropped to his hand, suspended between them. Stephen lowered it. She freed the lace herself with 2 careful fingers. The silence changed, only slightly, but enough for him to feel it. "Are you comfortable here?" he asked. "Yes. Do you require anything from Chalfont House?" "Your carriage? More servants?" "No." "Money?" A faint hardness entered her expression. "My settlement provides an allowance for my separate use. I am not destitute because I left your breakfast table." Shame moved through him. "I didn't mean that. I know that is part of the difficulty. You provide before anyone can need. You correct before anyone can object. You protect before anyone can decide whether protection is what they want." Stephen thought of Avelden House the previous evening, of Sophia stepping ahead of Penelope, and the speed with which he had crossed the room. "Should I have allowed Sophia to insult you?" "No. Then I don't understand." "I know." The answer was not cruel. That made it worse. Penelope walked toward the window. Outside, Bedford Place was beginning its ordinary morning. A tradesman's cart rolled past. A servant carried a basket toward a neighboring door. Life continued with offensive ease. "I need one answer, Stephen." It was the first time she had used his name. Hope rose before he could stop it. "Ask me." She turned. "I need to know whether I was chosen or paid." The hope became something far more painful. Stephen drew breath. This was the moment to tell her that her father had never asked for her hand on Stephen's behalf. Yet the truth was larger than that single fact, and Penelope was asking for more than a correction. She wanted to know why he had married her. He could not answer that honestly, while still hiding from himself. "I will answer you," he said. Her chin lifted. Today, Stephen forced himself not to offer a promise he could not fulfill properly. "When I can answer without asking you to accept words, merely because I need you to believe them." Penelope studied him for a long moment. "Then I'll stay here." Every instinct in him rebelled. He wanted to tell her to come home. He wanted her chair occupied at breakfast tomorrow. He wanted the absurd roses between them and the sound of her turning pages in the morning room. He wanted certainty restored before luncheon. Instead he stood. "I won't order you back." Something in her face eased. Not forgiveness, not trust, but perhaps the first absence of fear that rank would be used against her. Stephen bowed. "May I call again?" "Not tomorrow." He accepted the blow. "When then?" "I'll send word." "Very well." Mrs. Frobisher appeared in the adjoining doorway as he left, watching him with the expression of a woman prepared to defend every inch of her house if necessary. Stephen inclined his head to her and stepped into the street. By the time his carriage turned back toward Mayfair, grief had hardened into another question. Penelope's departure had begun with his own failure, but the evening had started with someone else's calculated insult. Less than an hour later, Stephen entered Avelden House without sending up his card, found Horace in the library, and closed the door behind him. "Why?" he asked. "Was my wife placed below your sister at dinner?" Horace Dacre did not rise when Stephen entered the library, though his hand tightened around the newspaper he had been pretending to read. Morning light fell across the carpet in long pale bars, catching dust above the desk and the silver rim of a neglected coffee service. Stephen closed the door behind him. "Why was my wife placed below your sister at dinner?" Horace lowered the paper. "Good morning to you as well. Answer me. It was a household mistake." "No." Stephen's voice remained quiet. The steward checked the order twice. Sophia spoke to him. "Then my wife was placed beneath a woman she outranks by several degrees." That is not confusion. Horace gave a small sigh, as if Stephen were making ceremony tedious. Sophia takes an interest in these things. Perhaps she was overzealous in lowering a duchess beneath herself. You corrected it. No harm was done. Stephen stared at him. That sentence struck differently now. No harm was done. He had thought something similar after correcting Sophia in front of the room. Rank restored. Order repaired. Problem finished. Penelope's empty chair at breakfast had exposed the stupidity of that belief. Your sister insulted my wife in my presence. Horace leaned back, and you defended her very nobly. There was mockery in the word, but Stephen did not take the bait. Did Sophia instruct the steward? You would have to ask Sophia. I am asking the master of this house whether his household deliberately humiliated the Duchess of Chalfont. Horace's expression cooled. Be careful, Stephen. If you turn every social error into an accusation, people may begin to wonder why you are so anxious about a marriage that is clearly unsettled. Stephen felt the old instinct rise. End the conversation. Use rank. Make the other man retreat. It had worked all his adult life. Instead, he asked, Why are you so interested in whether my wife remains visible? For the first time, Horace did not answer immediately. Then he smiled. Because London is interested. A duchess leaves her husband's house before midnight, and you expect no one to notice. Stephen had told no one outside his own household and Mrs. Frobisher's. That meant either a servant had spoken or Horace was guessing from Penelope's absence. Neither possibility pleased him. My wife is staying with her aunt. How comforting. There will be no statement from me about her absence. Horace's smile sharpened. Perhaps there should be. A few words might prevent people from imagining worse. What words? That her grace is indisposed, that she requires rest, that you remain united in every meaningful sense. Stephen thought of Penelope in Bedford Place, saying, You protect before anyone can decide whether protection is what they want. I will not publish an explanation of my wife's choices without consulting her. Horace raised his brows. How modern of you. How married of me. Stephen turned toward the door. Behind him, Horace said, Sophia only sees what everyone eventually sees. Stephen stopped. And what is that? That affection cannot be manufactured out of obligation. The words landed close enough to last night that Stephen's hand tightened at his side. He did not turn around. You know nothing about my marriage. Then perhaps you should stop giving people reasons to think otherwise. Stephen left before anger could make him careless. By Sunday afternoon, London had begun doing what London did best. It converted uncertainty into certainty without waiting for facts. At Bedford Place, Penelope discovered the shift not through a scandal sheet or a cruel letter, but through absence. Lady Meryton postponed a morning call. Mrs. Vale sent regrets for a small music hall. A woman who had once pressed Penelope to become patroness of a school subscription now wrote that perhaps the matter could wait until later in the season. None of the messages said why. They did not need to. Mrs. Frobisher laid the third note beside the tea tray and looked offended on Penelope's behalf. Cowards always prefer stationery. Penelope almost smiled. At least this one has good penmanship. That is not a virtue under the circumstances. No. Penelope looked at the notes again. Their language was careful. No one accused her of misconduct. No one dared suggest that a married duchess had forfeited her rank merely by residing for a time with a respectable aunt. Instead, they offered postponements, concern, delicacy, and space. Society was not attacking her. It was quietly preparing to forget her. until Stephen decided what she was worth. That realization hurt more than direct insult would have. Mrs. Frobisher poured tea. "You may stay here as long as you wish. I know. You needn't see anyone." Penelope looked up. Her aunt's expression was kind, not controlling, which made the offer harder to refuse. "That is precisely why I must." Mrs. Frobisher set down the pot. "Explain. If I hide, they will say I was ashamed. If I wait for Stephen to restore me, they will say my place depends entirely upon whether he chooses to speak. It does not. I know that. I would like them to know it too." Penelope rose and crossed to the window. Bedford Place was quieter than Grosvenor Square, but carriages still moved steadily along the street. Somewhere in London, Sophia Dacre was likely making calls with that polished sympathy she wore so well. Penelope could almost hear her saying how unfortunate it all was, how difficult for the Duke, how painful for everyone. Nothing that could be challenged. Everything designed to leave a stain. "I am going to Kensington Gardens on Tuesday," Penelope said, during the fashionable promenade. Mrs. Frobisher studied her. "That is not a retreat. No." "Good." Penelope turned from the window. "Will you come with me? Try to stop me." This time Penelope did smile. It was brief but real. On Monday, another acquaintance sent word that a proposed visit would be inconvenient. By Tuesday morning, Penelope understood the pattern clearly enough that it no longer frightened her. It angered her, which was cleaner. She dressed in a dove-grey walking gown with a dark blue pelisse, neither mourning nor brilliance, and chose a simple bonnet. No Chalfont jewels, no display meant to remind anyone of the rank Stephen's family had given her. Her wedding ring remained beneath her glove. Before leaving, she paused beside the small writing table where her father's prayer book rested. She did not take it. The book belonged to memory. Today required presence. Mrs. Frobisher entered with her gloves fastened and her walking cane in hand. "Ready?" Penelope drew one measured breath. Yes. Their carriage carried them west through London toward Kensington Gardens. As they approached, the traffic thickened with private coaches, curricles, riders, and pedestrians taking advantage of the mild May afternoon. Penelope felt the first true flicker of fear when she saw how many familiar carriages lined the approach. It would have been easier to return to Bedford Place, easier to let a week pass, easier to wait until society became bored. But ease had already cost her too much. She stepped down when the carriage stopped. Mrs. Frobisher joined her. Together they entered the gardens. For the first several minutes, nothing happened. Then Penelope saw Lady Meryton ahead with 3 women she knew well enough to greet. Lady Meryton saw Penelope too. Their eyes met across the path. There was time for recognition, time for courtesy, time for one of the women to raise a hand. Instead, Lady Meryton touched her companion's arm and turned the entire little group toward another walk. Penelope stopped. Mrs. Frobisher's cane struck the gravel once beside her. "Well," her aunt said, "that was exceptionally clear." Penelope watched the women move away. The old instinct whispered that dignity required pretending not to care. She rejected it. Dignity did not require blindness. "Yes," she said, "it was." Then she lifted her chin and continued forward on the same path where anyone who wished to avoid the Duchess of Chalfont would have to make the effort themselves. Lady Meryton and her companions had gone barely 20 yards before Penelope understood that turning away had not been enough for them. One of the women glanced back, another leaned closer to Lady Meryton. Their parasols tilted together like pale flowers, bending toward the same ugly secret. Penelope kept walking. Gravel pressed softly beneath her slippers. Mrs. Frobisher remained beside her with the expression of a woman storing names for later use. "Do not," Penelope murmured. "Do not what? Terrify them with your cane? I was considering only mild instruction. Aunt Miriam." "Very well." Mrs. Frobisher's mouth tightened. "But if anyone deserves correction, it is a woman who can turn her entire body away while still managing to stare." Penelope almost smiled. The small victory lasted until two more ladies approached from the opposite direction. Lady Granby was a widow. Penelope had known for years. Beside her walked Mrs. Chalfont, whose invitations had become noticeably less frequent since Penelope left Chalfont House. They could not avoid her without stepping directly onto the grass. Lady Granby, therefore, stopped. "Your Grace." The curtsy was correct. The warmth was not. "Lady Granby." Penelope returned the greeting. Mrs. Chalfont looked at her with an expression carefully balanced between pity and curiosity. "We were so sorry to hear you have been unwell." "You heard incorrectly." Mrs. Chalfont blinked. "Oh, I am quite well. Of course, how reassuring." Lady Granby glanced toward Mrs. Frobisher, perhaps hoping the aunt might rescue the conversation. Mrs. Frobisher looked serenely at the trees. Mrs. Chalfont recovered first. Naturally, no one wishes to intrude upon private difficulties. Then no one should. Penelope kept her tone pleasant. "Quite." Mrs. Chalfont adjusted one glove. "Still, one admires His Grace's sense of obligation." The words struck with surgical precision. Not affection, not devotion. Obligation. Penelope felt the old wound open. But this time she was not standing unseen outside a card room. She was in daylight. She had her own voice. "Then admire him," she said. Mrs. Chalfont's eyes widened slightly. Penelope continued, "I am not an obligation you are required to pity." Silence settled between them. Lady Granby lowered her gaze. Mrs. Chalfont flushed. "I didn't mean to offend you." "Then we may both be grateful that you needn't repeat it." Mrs. Frobisher made a small sound that might have been a cough. Penelope suspected it was not. Lady Granby offered a hurried farewell, and the two women moved on. Penelope remained where she was for one breath, then another. Her hands were cold inside her gloves. Her pulse was not steady. Courage, she discovered, did not feel like calm. It felt like choosing not to flee while every part of the body recommended it. "You did very well," Mrs. Frobisher said. I nearly shook. "That is allowed. I would prefer it not to be visible." It wasn't. Penelope looked ahead. More familiar faces. More opportunities for discomfort. "Then let us continue." They had gone halfway around the walk when Mrs. Frobisher's pace slowed. Penelope followed her gaze and saw Stephen approaching from the direction of the carriage road. He was alone. No secretary, no friend, no visible purpose, except the one written plainly in the way he had already seen her. Penelope's chest tightened before she could prevent it. He wore a dark coat and buff trousers, perfectly ordinary for the hour. But there was nothing ordinary about the attention he gave her. His eyes moved once to Mrs. Frobisher in greeting, then returned to Penelope. He stopped at a proper distance. "Mrs. Frobisher, Your Grace." Her aunt's tone was civilized enough to survive in church. Stephen looked at Penelope. "May I speak with you?" She considered refusing. Then she remembered Mrs. Chalfont's pity, Lady Meryton's retreat, and every person in the gardens already pretending not to watch. "You may walk with us." Stephen inclined his head. He did not immediately offer his arm. That mattered. They began along the path, Mrs. Frobisher on Penelope's other side. For several moments, Stephen said nothing. Penelope could feel his restraint like a second conversation. Finally, he said, I heard about the cancelled calls. London is efficient. Cruelty usually is. She looked at him. Do you consider avoidance cruelty? When it is intended to make someone disappear? Yes. The answer surprised her enough that she looked away first. Stephen continued. I spoke with Avelden. About his sister. About the dinner order. Penelope's steps slowed slightly. And he called it a household mistake. You do not believe him. No, neither do I. Stephen glanced toward her. The steward has been blamed. Penelope stopped. Mrs. Frobisher stopped with her. Stephen did the same. Blamed how? Penelope asked. Avelden says the man confused the order. The steward looked at the memorandum twice. I know. And Lady Sophia spoke to him before the procession. I saw that as well. Penelope's expression hardened. Then the explanation is convenient. Yes, too convenient. Yes. Something passed between them then that had not existed in Bedford Place. Not trust. Not yet. Recognition, perhaps. They had both seen the same event. They had both arrived at the same conclusion without one instructing the other how to think. Mrs. Frobisher looked discreetly toward a distant flower bed. Stephen said, I will continue asking questions. Penelope's eyes sharpened. Ask them. Do not act for me without telling me. He held her gaze. I understand. Do you? I am trying to. There was no polished ducal certainty in the answer. That unsettled her more than confidence would have. They resumed walking. A group of acquaintances passed and bowed. This time no one turned away. Stephen noticed. Penelope noticed that he noticed. The old version of their marriage would have made the moment simple. He would offer his arm because ceremony expected it. She would take it because she was his wife. No one would ask what either wanted. They reached a crossing where the path narrowed around a bed of spring flowers. Stephen slowed. He turned slightly toward Penelope, but did not touch her. May I walk beside you? The question was so ordinary that for a second she did not understand why it struck her. He was already beside her. Then she saw his arm, offered but not pressed against her. He was asking for the public intimacy their marriage had once assumed. Penelope looked at the dark cloth beneath her gloved hand. She remembered hundreds of formal entrances, dinners, balls, church steps, carriage descents. She had rested her fingers on his sleeve countless times. None of those touches had contained choice, because neither of them had ever named choice as necessary. Now he waited. People were watching. That could not decide for her. His remorse could not decide for her. Her own loneliness could not decide for her. Penelope placed her hand upon his arm. Yes, Stephen's breath changed, barely, enough that she felt it more than heard it. He did not cover her hand with his. He did not draw her closer. He simply matched his pace to hers. Mrs. Frobisher fell half a step behind, near enough for propriety and far enough to grant them conversation. They completed one circuit of the walk. Penelope became acutely aware of the firmness beneath Stephen's sleeve, the controlled length of his stride, the way he shortened it slightly to suit hers. It should have felt familiar. Instead, it felt new because it had been asked for. You nearly said something at Bedford Place, she said. Stephen looked ahead. Yes. About my father? Yes. I told you I wanted the truth. You did. I still do. He turned his head toward her. Something unguarded moved across his face and disappeared. I know. Penelope's fingers tightened once against his sleeve before she consciously relaxed them. Then tomorrow, tell me what my father actually asked of you. Stephen stopped walking. Penelope released his arm and faced him. For the first time since she had left Chalfont House, he looked less like a duke confronting a difficulty and more like a man who had been given something frightening because it mattered. "May I call?" he asked. "Tomorrow afternoon. I'll be there. And Stephen?" "Yes. Do not come prepared to make the answer easier for me." He held her gaze. "I won't." Penelope believed that he meant it. Whether he could do it was another question. She turned back toward Mrs. Frobisher, and they continued toward the carriage. Behind them, London resumed its murmuring. Ahead waited the one truth Penelope had feared since the night she left. Whether her marriage had begun as a choice, or whether every tenderness she had imagined was merely interest paid on an old debt. Stephen arrived at Bedford Place the following afternoon 5 minutes before the appointed hour, and spent those 5 minutes sitting inside his carriage with his gloves folded across one knee, trying to decide which truth would hurt Penelope least. By the time Mrs. Frobisher's footman opened the door, he understood that the question itself was another form of cowardice. The truth was not his to soften. Penelope had asked for it whole. Mrs. Frobisher received him in the front drawing-room with the same measured civility as before. "My niece is in the morning-room." Stephen inclined his head. "Thank you. I'll be nearby." "I expected nothing else." Her expression softened by perhaps half a degree. "Good." Penelope was standing beside the window when he entered. The afternoon light turned the edges of her grey dress silver. She wore no Chalfont jewels. Her wedding ring remained beneath the glove on her left hand, invisible but present, and Stephen had to remind himself that its presence promised him nothing. She gestured toward the chair opposite hers. "You said you would answer." "I did." He sat only after she did. A small tea table stood between them, untouched. On the writing desk near the wall rested Colonel Hollingworth's worn prayer book, its calfskin cover closed, its dented brass clasp catching a thin line of light. Stephen looked away from it, Penelope noticed. "Begin with my father." Stephen drew one breath. "At Waterloo, your father saved my life. I know that much. You know the version people tell at dinners." His mouth tightened. "The cleaner version." Penelope said nothing. Stephen rested his hands on his knees because he did not trust himself to move them carelessly. "I was injured during the fighting, not badly enough to die where I fell, but badly enough that I could not move quickly. Your father came back for me when he had no obligation to do so. He got me clear before another movement of cavalry crossed the ground. The old memory arrived without permission. Noise, heat, mud, a hand gripping the back of his coat, Colonel Hollingworth swearing at him for being too heavy while refusing to leave him. Stephen forced himself back into the quiet London room. I spent years calling that act a debt because debt was easier to understand than mercy. Penelope's gaze remained steady. What did he ask in return? Nothing, then. Stephen looked at her directly. Nothing at all. A faint line appeared between her brows. Later, when he knew his health was failing, he asked me one thing. Penelope's fingers tightened together in her lap. Stephen continued before fear could make him postpone it. He asked me to make certain you would never be left financially desperate. He worried that his affairs might not leave you as secure as he wished. He asked me to watch over that practical concern if circumstances turned against you. Penelope's face changed very little, but Stephen saw the force of the words reach her. Marriage? She asked. No. Did he ever suggest it? No. Did he ever ask you to court me? No. Did he ask you to use your influence to find me a husband? No. Stephen's voice lowered. He never asked me to arrange your life. The silence between them became immense. Penelope looked toward the prayer book. Then why did you marry me? There it was, the question he had avoided in Bedford Place, because any answer given then would have sounded like desperate repair. It still frightened him now, but fear no longer excused silence. Because I wanted to. Penelope's eyes returned to his face. That is not an explanation. No. Stephen accepted the rebuke. It is only the beginning of one. He rose, then stopped when she stiffened. May I stand? I can think more clearly when I am not pretending this conversation is ordinary. After a moment, she nodded. Stephen moved no closer to her. He went instead to the mantel and looked down at the unlit grate. After your father died, I told myself I was calling on you because I had promised him I would not neglect you. Then I began noticing when you were not in a room. Penelope's breath changed, but she remained silent. I knew which gatherings you disliked. I knew you always chose the chair nearest a window when a room became too warm. I knew you laughed differently with your aunt than you did with anyone else. He gave a short, humorless breath. I knew all of this while insisting to myself that I was merely being attentive to a responsibility. Penelope looked down. Stephen continued. Then another man began calling on you. Her eyes lifted. Mr. Latham? Yes. He called twice. I know. Of course you do. There was the faintest edge of irony in her voice. Stephen almost smiled, but the moment was too fragile. I disliked him immediately. You barely spoke to him. That did not improve my opinion. Penelope stared at him for a second, and something almost warm passed through her expression before caution reclaimed it. Stephen went on. I realized I could not bear the idea that you might marry someone else. Instead of admitting what that meant, I made it respectable in my own mind. Your father had trusted me. You needed security. I had rank, property, and the ability to provide it. I turned desire into duty because duty did not frighten me. Penelope's eyes glistened, though no tears fell. And after we married, I did the same thing. He faced her fully. Every time I wanted something tender from you, I found a practical reason not to ask. Every time I missed you, I found an estate matter to occupy myself. Every time I noticed what pleased you, I provided it without admitting that your pleasure mattered to me personally. His voice roughened. Then Horace mocked the marriage, and I did what I have done for years. I took the thing that frightened me and gave it a colder name. Penelope stood. Stephen did not move. She crossed the small distance to the writing desk and rested one hand beside her father's prayer book. You called me an obligation because you were afraid to admit I was not one. Yes, do you understand that this does not make what you said less cruel? Yes, it makes it worse. Stephen closed his eyes for one brief second. Yes, Penelope turned toward him. My father did not make me your burden. No. Her voice remained steady. He did not make me your obligation. No. She came one step closer. Then my father did not make me your obligation. You did. Stephen took the words without defense. I did. That answer changed something. Not enough to repair the distance, but enough to keep it from widening. Penelope looked at him for a long moment, as if testing whether an excuse would follow. None did. Why did you not tell me any of this before? Because I was more comfortable being necessary than being vulnerable. Those are not the same thing. I know that now. Do you? The question was not mocking. Stephen understood that she was genuinely uncertain. I am beginning to. Penelope's gaze lowered to his hand where it rested loosely at his side. For one suspended moment, Stephen thought she might turn away. Instead, she stepped closer and touched 2 fingers lightly to the inside of his wrist. The contact was so brief that another man might have mistaken it for nothing. Stephen did not. He felt the small pressure of her gloved fingertips over his pulse and remained perfectly still. Penelope withdrew first. "I believe you about my father," she said. Relief came too quickly, and he checked it. "That is more than I expected today. Do not mistake belief for forgiveness. I won't, and do not mistake compassion for an invitation to bring me home. I won't do that either." She studied him, perhaps listening for resistance. Stephen gave her none. "There is another matter," he said. "The gossip." Her expression cooled. "Sophia?" "Likely Sophia. Possibly Horace as well. And what do you intend to do?" He knew the answer that would have come naturally 1 week earlier. "Correct it. Crush it. Make the room obey." Instead, he said, "I would like to make the truth public." Penelope's shoulders tightened. "Not yet." Stephen nodded. "Then not yet." Surprise flickered across her face. "You agree very quickly." "I am trying to learn the difference between protecting you and deciding for you." Penelope looked away, and this time the silence was not hostile. A knock came at the door. Mrs. Frobisher entered, carrying a folded notice on a small silver tray. This arrived for Penelope. Penelope took it, broke the seal, and read. Stephen watched her expression sharpen. "What is it?" She handed him the paper. It announced a Saturday meeting of the Ladies' Committee, supporting widows of former officers. One line near the bottom was enough to change the air in the room. The continuation of Her Grace, the Duchess of Chalfont, as patroness would be discussed. Stephen looked up. Penelope was already watching him. "Do not go ahead of me," she said quietly. Stephen folded the notice once and returned it to her. "I won't." Saturday arrived with a sky so clear that Penelope found the brightness almost insulting. The Ladies' Committee met in the front drawing room of Lady Westmere's house in Mayfair, a room built for agreeable causes and carefully managed reputations. Gilt chairs stood in a semicircle. A long table near the windows held correspondence, subscription lists, and small stacks of printed appeals for widows of former officers. Penelope had served as one of the committee's patronesses for nearly a year. Until this week, no one had questioned whether her name belonged there. Mrs. Frobisher accompanied her and took a chair near the wall, close enough for propriety, but far enough not to make Penelope look guarded. Lady Sophia Dacre was already present. She wore cream silk, a restrained colour that made her expression of concern appear almost saintly. Lady Westmere opened the meeting with routine business. 2 annuities were approved. A school allowance for 3 officers' daughters was renewed. Penelope answered a question about a widow in Kent, and forced herself not to notice how many women avoided meeting her eyes. Then Lady Sophia folded her hands in her lap. "There is one matter I think we must address before we adjourn." The room changed before she said Penelope's name. Penelope felt it in the slight turn of shoulders, and the way Lady Westmere looked down at the agenda she had already finished. "Go on," Lady Westmere said. Sophia's tone remained gentle. "This committee has always depended upon confidence. Not merely money, moral confidence." No one interrupted. "Her Grace has served generously," Sophia continued, inclining her head toward Penelope. "No one disputes that. But circumstances have become delicate." Penelope's pulse slowed rather than quickened. She had expected cruelty to arrive dressed as concern. Sophia did not disappoint her. Lady Westmere said, "If you have a point, Sophia, you should make it plainly." "Very well." Sophia looked directly at Penelope, a duchess living apart from her husband while presiding over a charitable body, concerned with households, widows, and domestic stability, invites questions. Questions may harm the very women we are meant to help. Mrs. Frobisher shifted once beside the wall, but Penelope did not look at her. "What questions?" Penelope asked. Sophia sighed. "You know what London is saying. I know what certain people are encouraging London to say." A small silence followed. Sophia's smile tightened. "I have encouraged nothing." "Then this should be easy. State the concern without ornament." Lady Westmere's eyes lifted sharply, but she did not stop the exchange. Sophia accepted the challenge. His Grace himself has called the marriage one of obligation. The words landed with greater force than Penelope expected. Not because they were new, because they were true enough to be dangerous. Several women looked away. Others looked directly at her now. Sophia continued with the composure of someone laying flowers upon a grave. "If the Duke of Chalfont considers the union founded on duty rather than affection, and if her Grace has chosen to reside elsewhere, perhaps it would be wiser for her to withdraw temporarily from visible patronage until the private situation is resolved." Penelope kept her hands still in her lap. "You are proposing that I resign, temporarily step aside, because my husband spoke cruelly." Sophia's expression flickered. "Because public confidence matters. In the widow's relief subscriptions, in everything attached to respected names." Lady Westmere cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should avoid turning this into a personal quarrel." "It became personal when my marriage was placed on the agenda," Penelope said. Her voice did not rise. "If my work has been dishonest, say so. If funds have been mismanaged under my name, say so. If any widow has been denied assistance because of my conduct, say so." No one answered. Penelope looked around the room. "Then what, precisely, are you asking me to answer for?" One of the older patronesses, Lady Bexham, spoke reluctantly. "Appearances, Your Grace." "Whose?" The question was soft. Lady Bexham blinked. Penelope turned back to Sophia. "I will not resign." A murmur passed through the room. Sophia's face remained composed. "No one wishes to humiliate you." "Then do not attempt it politely." Mrs. Frobisher looked down, perhaps to conceal satisfaction. Lady Westmere drew a slow breath. "There is a formal motion before us now, whether intended or not. We must dispose of it," Sophia said. "Then I move that her Grace suspend her patronage until her domestic circumstances are settled." For one terrible moment, Penelope understood how efficiently a room could erase a woman while every person inside it remained civil. Lady Bexham hesitated. Another woman glanced toward the door. Lady Westmere seemed genuinely distressed. Penelope felt anger rise through the hurt and welcomed it. "I oppose the motion," she said, "not because I require the title of patroness, but because accepting it would declare that a wife loses moral usefulness when her husband wounds her. I will not teach that lesson in a room meant to help widows." The door opened. Every head turned. Stephen stood on the threshold. He had clearly come in haste. Though haste on the Duke of Chalfont still looked more controlled than most men's calm. His coat was immaculate, but there was no social ease in his expression. Penelope's first emotion was not relief. It was alarm. She had asked him not to go ahead of her. Stephen's eyes found hers at once. Something in his face changed when he saw the semicircle of women, Sophia seated opposite Penelope, and the papers on the table. Lady Westmere rose. "Your Grace." Stephen bowed. "Forgive the intrusion. I was informed that my wife's position here was under discussion." Sophia answered before anyone else could, only because discretion seemed kinder than scandal. Stephen looked at her. Kindness is an ambitious word for what is happening in this room. Penelope's heartbeat quickened. She had defended herself. She did not need him to finish the argument. Perhaps he saw that, because he said nothing more for several seconds. Then Lady Westmere explained the motion. Stephen listened without interruption. When she finished, Sophia added, "Surely you understand the difficulty. Your own description of the marriage has created uncertainty." That struck him. Penelope saw it. His jaw tightened, and for one brief second, she thought he might finally say it. He might tell them that her father had never demanded the marriage. He might tell them he had chosen her. He might stand in the room and expose the truth he had admitted privately at Bedford Place. Instead, Stephen reached for the weapon he trusted most. Rank, his voice became cold enough to still every whisper. "Her Grace remains under my protection. This discussion is finished." The room obeyed. Lady Westmere closed the agenda. Lady Bexham lowered her eyes. Even Sophia sat back. No one challenged the Duke of Chalfont. The motion died without a vote. Penelope felt no triumph, only the old ache returning in a new shape. Under my protection. Not my wife was chosen. Not I wronged her. Not her work stands on its own merit. Protection, duty, authority. Stephen had silenced the room, and in doing so, he had left the truth untouched. Penelope rose. "If the meeting is concluded, I will take my leave." Stephen looked at her, and she saw too late that he understood something had gone wrong. He stepped aside at once. Mrs. Frobisher joined Penelope without a word. They reached the front steps before Stephen followed. Carriages moved along the street, beyond the iron railings. Penelope stopped before her aunt's carriage and turned to face him. "You said you would not go ahead of me. I did not intend to, but you did. They were trying to remove you, and I was answering them." Stephen's expression tightened. "I could not stand there while Sophia used my words against you. Then you should have corrected the words." He went still. Penelope's voice remained quiet, because anger did not require spectacle. "You made me untouchable in that room. You did not make the truth plain. Penelope, you told them I was under your protection. You are. That is exactly the problem." He stared at her. She saw the moment understanding began, unwelcome and sharp. "I thought I was defending you." "You were defending what belongs to your name. That is not what I meant." "I know." The words hurt them both. Penelope took one step closer, not in intimacy, but so he could not mistake her meaning. "You keep giving me safety when what I ask for is truth." Stephen had no answer. For once, he did not invent one. Penelope turned toward the carriage. He did not touch her or try to stop her. As Mrs. Frobisher climbed in, Penelope looked back once. Stephen remained on the pavement, motionless beneath the bright May sky, while behind him the house, where he had just silenced an entire committee, seemed suddenly too small to contain the lesson he had failed to learn. The next morning, before Penelope had finished breakfast, Mrs. Frobisher's footman entered with an unusual message. The Avildon steward was downstairs alone, asking for a private audience with the Duchess of Chalfont. The Avildon steward stood in Mrs. Frobisher's front parlour with his hat held rigidly between both hands, looking less like a man who had come to accuse an earl's sister than one who expected to lose his livelihood before luncheon. Penelope entered with her aunt beside her and recognized him at once. He was the same man who had consulted the folded memorandum before dinner at Avildon House, the same man whose face had tightened when Lady Sophia altered the order of precedence. He bowed deeply. "Mrs. Frobisher." "You asked to see me," Penelope said. "Yes, Your Grace. I hope I haven't presumed." "That depends upon what you have come to say." The steward swallowed. "I was told yesterday that the mistake at dinner was mine." Penelope watched him carefully. "By whom?" Lady Sophia first, Lord Avilden afterward. Mrs. Frobisher's mouth flattened. The steward continued. Her ladyship said I had embarrassed the family through carelessness. His lordship said that if there was any further discussion of the matter, I should not expect a favourable reference when I leave the household. Penelope felt anger sharpen, clean and immediate. Were you careless? No, your grace. Then show me. He looked relieved and terrified at once. From inside his coat, he withdrew a folded sheet of foolscap and placed it on the table. Penelope did not touch it immediately. She recognized the deep central crease first. Then the faint wine stain at the lower right corner. She had seen both on the night of the dinner. This is the same memorandum. The original, your grace. I keep the working orders until the end of the season in case there is any question over service. He unfolded it carefully. Several names appeared in the steward's firm hand. The Duchess of Chalfont stood exactly where her rank required. Below that, in darker ink and a different hand, another instruction had been added. Duchess of Chalfont after Lady Sophia. Penelope read the line twice. Whose writing? Lady Sophia's. You saw her write it? Yes, your grace. Before dinner, nearly 20 minutes before the company went in, that mattered. Stephen's cruel words had been spoken later, in the card room, after dinner. Sophia had not diminished Penelope because she had overheard a duke confessing indifference. The humiliation had begun before the sentence existed. The sentence had merely given Sophia something useful to repeat. Why did you obey her? Penelope asked. The steward looked down. She manages the household arrangements when Lord Avilden entertains. She has done so since the late Countess died. When she changes an order, the staff obeys unless his lordship says otherwise. Did Lord Avilden know? The man hesitated. I can't say what his lordship knew before the dinner. I can say he did not correct Lady Sophia afterward. Penelope nodded. She would not turn uncertainty into fact merely because it suited her. And why bring this to me rather than to his grace? Because the injury was done to you. The answer surprised her. The steward glanced toward the memorandum. And because his grace is a duke, if I put this into his hands, Lord Avilden might say, I was trying to secure another position through Chalfont influence. I would rather the paper speak for what it is. Penelope looked at him more carefully. You are taking a considerable risks. I have served respectable houses for 23 years, your grace. I can survive being dismissed. I would rather not survive by accepting blame for something I did not do. Mrs. Frobisher's expression softened. Penelope reached toward the memorandum, then stopped before lifting it. May I examine it? Of course. She held the paper by its edges, the wine stain, the crease, the two hands of writing. Nothing dramatic, nothing forged, nothing hidden in a locked drawer. Merely one small record of a social insult planned before it happened. Yet the modesty of the evidence made it more convincing. I will not keep this, Penelope said. The steward looked startled. Your grace, it belongs in your custody. You brought it, you preserved it. If I take it, Lady Sophia can claim I altered, pressured, or appropriated it. Mrs. Frobisher gave a quiet, approving hum. Penelope returned the sheet. Will you keep it exactly as it is? Yes, and if I ask you later to show it before witnesses, will you come? The man drew a slow breath. Yes, your grace, even if Lord Avilden objects. His fingers tightened around the paper. Yes. Penelope nodded once. Then fold it and take it with you. He did. The deep crease returned to its familiar line. Thank you, Penelope said, not for choosing my side, for refusing to surrender your own truth. Something moved across the steward's face, gratitude perhaps, but he bowed before it could become embarrassing. When he left, Mrs. Frobisher waited until the door closed. You know what Stephen will want to do. Yes. Storm Avilden House? He does not storm anywhere. He enters rooms quietly and makes other people wish they had fled before he arrived. A ducal storm, then? Penelope looked toward the door. And I am going to tell him no. Stephen arrived that afternoon after Penelope sent a brief message asking him to call. He entered the morning room with a restraint so deliberate that she knew he had already sensed the importance of the summons. Mrs. Frobisher remained in the adjoining room, the door open as before. What happened? Stephen asked. Penelope told him everything. She described the memorandum, the deep fold, the wine stain, the correct original order, and Sophia's alteration in her own hand. She explained that the steward had retained the original and would produce it later, if asked. Stephen listened without interruption until she finished. Then his expression went very still. I am going to Avilden House. No. The words stopped him more effectively than rank stopped most people. Penelope. No. She threatened a servant's livelihood to conceal what she did. I know. And she used my words yesterday to remove you from a committee after planning to diminish you before I ever said them. I know that too. Stephen stood and walked once toward the window, then back. You expect me to do nothing. I expect you to do what I asked. Which is? Wait, his jaw tightened. For what? For a moment when the truth cannot be reduced to a private quarrel between two noble houses. Stephen looked at her. You have already decided how you want this handled. Not entirely, but I know how I do not want it handled. By me, without me. The distinction landed. Penelope saw it in the way his shoulders lowered fractionally. If you confront Sophia today, she continued, she will deny intention. Horace will call it a household misunderstanding. The steward will be punished for bringing the memorandum here, and society will hear that the Duke of Chalfont has silenced another unpleasant conversation. Stephen flinched at the last phrase. Yesterday's failure stood between them. Under my protection, he looked away. You are right. Penelope had expected resistance. The absence of it unsettled her. That was quick. I am trying to become less slow where it matters. She said nothing. Stephen sat opposite her. For several moments, he looked at his hands rather than at her. When I learned what Sophia had done, my first instinct was to remove the problem. Yes, I have begun to understand that I treat fear like an instruction. His voice was quieter now. If something threatens a person I care for, I act, I arrange, I command. Then I tell myself the command was duty. Penelope held his gaze. And now I am beginning to understand how often I called fear a duty. The honesty of it hurt in a different way. Not sharply, deeply. Stephen placed one hand on the table between them, palm upward. He did not reach across the remaining distance. He did not ask her to take it. He simply left the choice where she could see it. Penelope looked at his open hand. She remembered the card room, the committee, every moment in which his power had arrived before his vulnerability. Then she looked at his face. There was no command there, only uncertainty. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. Stephen's fingers closed around hers with careful warmth. He did not tighten them as if fearing she might leave. He only held on. Penelope did not withdraw. They remained that way while she explained what she wanted next. The steward would keep the memorandum. No confrontation would happen without her agreement. No public correction would be issued in her name. If Sophia had built her attack through respectable rooms, Penelope would answer where respectable people could not pretend not to hear. Stephen listened. His thumb did not move over her glove. He did not turn reassurance into intimacy she had not offered. He simply kept his hand beneath hers and said when she finished, "All right." Penelope studied him. "You mean that?" "Yes. Even if waiting makes you angry, especially then." Something inside her eased. Not forgiveness, not yet, but trust, perhaps, in its smallest usable form. For the first time since leaving Chalfont House, Penelope allowed herself to sit beside the possibility that Stephen might change, not because losing her frightened him, but because he had finally begun to understand why she left. Stephen came to Bedford Place the next afternoon without sending a message ahead, yet there was nothing abrupt in the way he entered the morning room. Mrs. Frobisher had received him downstairs, and after one long look that appeared to weigh both his rank and his usefulness, allowed him through with the reminder that Lady Sophia's requested call was expected the following day. Penelope was seated near the window with a book open on her lap, though she had not turned a page for several minutes. Her father's prayer book remained on the writing desk across the room, exactly where she had left it. Stephen stopped just inside the doorway. "May I come in?" The question was unnecessary in the legal sense. It mattered anyway. Penelope closed her book. "Yes." He entered and waited until she indicated the chair opposite her. For a moment he said nothing. Penelope had grown used to his silences over 13 months of marriage, but this one felt different. Earlier silences had been walls. This one seemed to be a man searching for the courage not to hide behind one. Stephen removed his gloves and set them on his knee. "I came to apologize." Penelope's expression did not change. "You have apologized before." "Not for the right thing." That made her look at him more closely. Stephen continued. "At the committee meeting, you asked for truth. I answered with rank because rank was easier." Penelope's fingers tightened once around the closed book in her lap. "Yes, I told myself I was preventing humiliation." "You prevented a vote and avoided the question." "Yes." He accepted the word without flinching away from it. "When I said you were under my protection, I made the room obey me. I also made your position sound as if it existed because I permitted it." Penelope held his gaze. "That is what I heard." "Then you heard correctly." The answer landed more heavily than denial would have. Stephen looked down at his hands. "I have spent most of my life believing that if I could stop harm, then I had done the right thing. At Waterloo, hesitation killed men. On an estate, delay can ruin tenants. In Parliament, silence can allow worse men to decide. I learned to act first." He raised his eyes. "But you are not a battlefield, an estate problem, or a question for Parliament." Something in Penelope's face softened and then steadied again. "No. And when I use the same instincts with you, I turn care into authority." He paused. "I did that at the committee. I did it in smaller ways throughout our marriage, and I did worse in Avilden's card room." Penelope looked away toward the window. The street below was busy with an ordinary London afternoon. Wheels moving over stone, a servant carrying a parcel beneath one arm, a boy guiding a cart past the corner. Stephen's voice lowered. "What I said that night was cowardice." Penelope's throat tightened. He went on before she could answer. "I blamed your father because gratitude was a safer explanation than attachment. I used a dead man's sacrifice to avoid examining what you had become to me." She turned back. "And what had I become?" Stephen was silent for a beat too long. Penelope felt the old disappointment begin to rise. Then he said, "Someone whose opinion could wound me because it mattered. Someone whose absence I noticed before I admitted I was looking for her." someone I wanted near me badly enough that I began calling the wanting responsibility. His voice roughened slightly. I am not asking you to call that love. Not yet. I have given you too many reasons to distrust the names I put on things. Penelope's breath caught, but she remained still. That is more honest than anything you have said before. It should have been honest months ago. Yes, he nodded. Yes, no excuse followed. That was new too. Stephen leaned forward, forearms resting lightly against his thighs, but he did not reach toward her. There are things I need you to know before Lady Sophia comes tomorrow. Penelope straightened. What things? First, I will make no public statement about our marriage without your consent. She said nothing, so he continued. Second, I will not confront Sophia or Avilden unless you agree to it. Even after seeing what she did, especially after seeing what she did. Penelope watched him carefully. Go on. Third, I will not ask you to return to Chalfont House before you choose to. A shadow moved through his expression, but he did not look away. Fourth, your allowance remains exactly as your settlement provides. I will not reduce it, interfere with it, or use money to make separation uncomfortable. Penelope's brows drew together. I never believed you would. Perhaps not. But I need to say it because power does not become harmless merely because the man holding it believes he is decent. The words surprised her. Stephen continued. And I will not use society to pressure you. No friends sent to persuade you. No relatives. No patronesses. No carefully arranged calls that happen to become lectures on marital duty. Mrs. Frobisher, somewhere in the adjoining room, made a faint sound that might have been approval disguised as the movement of a chair. Penelope almost smiled despite herself. You have thought about this. I have thought about very little else. Silence settled again, but it was no longer empty. Penelope looked at him for a long moment. Why now? Because I finally understand that apology without consequence is only another request for comfort. The sentence reached somewhere she had kept guarded. Stephen's expression remained composed, but his restraint had ceased to look effortless. I want my wife home. Penelope's chest tightened. He continued before the words could become a demand. But wanting you does not make your answer mine. For several seconds she could not speak. The room seemed suddenly too quiet. Stephen had said nothing grand. He had not offered diamonds, a new house, a public declaration, or the destruction of Sophia's reputation. He had offered limits upon himself. It was the first gift he had given her that reduced his power rather than displayed it. Penelope looked down at the wedding ring beneath her glove. Do you expect me to forgive you today? No. Do you expect me to trust you because you have understood one mistake? No. Do you expect me to come home because you have promised not to force me? A flicker of pain crossed his face. No. She believed him. That frightened her more than doubt had. Stephen rose. I should go. Penelope looked up quickly. Already, surprise betrayed her. He noticed, but kindness kept him from using it. Lady Sophia comes tomorrow. You asked me not to interfere. I do not want my presence here to become another pressure on you before that conversation. He picked up his gloves. If you want me afterward, send word. If you do not, I will wait. He moved toward the door. Penelope watched him take 3 steps before something inside her resisted the distance. Not because all harm had vanished. It had not. Not because trust had returned whole. It had not. But because for the first time Stephen was leaving her room, without arranging the next move, without demanding reassurance, without placing his fear in her hands. Stephen. He stopped immediately. He did not turn until she stood. Penelope crossed the room slowly. Every step felt chosen. She stopped close enough to see the fatigue beneath his eyes, close enough to notice how tightly he held the gloves at his side. Stephen remained still. He did not lift a hand. "I do not forgive everything," she said. "I know. I am still angry. You should be, and tomorrow Lady Sophia is mine to answer." Yes, Penelope searched his face for even the smallest resistance. There was none. The certainty of that undid something she had been holding together since Avelden House. She stepped forward and rested her forehead briefly against his chest. Stephen inhaled, sharp and quiet, but still he did not move. Penelope closed the final inch herself. Only then did his arms come around her, carefully, not tightly enough to trap, not loosely enough to pretend the embrace meant nothing. Penelope's hands settled against the front of his coat. His heart beat hard beneath the cloth. For one suspended moment, neither of them spoke. The embrace carried no promise that everything was repaired. It carried something smaller and more honest: relief, recognition, permission to be human in the same room. Stephen lowered his head, but he did not kiss her hair or turn tenderness into more than she had offered. He simply held her until Penelope was the one who eased back. His arms released immediately. She looked up at him. "Tomorrow," she said, "I need you to trust me." Stephen's eyes held hers. "I will." This time, Penelope believed he understood that trusting her might require him to do nothing at all. Lady Sophia's note arrived shortly after 10 the next morning, carried by a footman in Avelden livery, and written in a hand too elegant to suggest inconvenience. She regretted, it said, that a sudden indisposition prevented her from calling upon her Grace that afternoon. If Penelope would permit it, Lady Sophia would attend Bedford Place on the following day instead. Penelope read the message twice, then handed it to Mrs. Frobisher. Her aunt adjusted her spectacles, read it once, and sniffed. An indisposition, apparently. How fortunate that illness has such excellent timing among the aristocracy. Penelope folded the note. She wants another day. To prepare. Or to learn what I know. Mrs. Frobisher looked toward the writing desk where Colonel Hollingworth's prayer book rested beside Penelope's correspondence. "And what will you do with the day she has given you?" Penelope had been asking herself the same question since waking. The embrace with Stephen the previous afternoon had changed something, but not enough to make uncertainty disappear. His apology had been precise. His promises had been voluntary. His arms had closed around her only after she had crossed the space between them. Those things mattered. They did not erase Avelden House. They did not erase the committee room, and they did not answer the practical question that now stood before her. Sophia had attacked through drawing rooms, committees, rank, and repetition. A private victory would not stop a public story. The annual officers' supper at Avelden House is on Friday, Penelope said. Mrs. Frobisher's expression sharpened. "You intend to go back there?" "Yes, to the very house where this began. That is precisely why." Her aunt considered her for a long moment. "And Stephen?" "I need him there." "Need?" Penelope looked down at the folded note in her hand. "Not to defend me, to tell the truth when it becomes his turn." Mrs. Frobisher's mouth softened. "Then you had better make very certain he understands the difference." Penelope sent a brief note to Chalfont House asking Stephen to call at 2. He arrived at 1:55. That small punctuality would once have seemed unremarkable. Now she noticed that he did not come early enough to pressure her and not late enough to imply indifference. Mrs. Frobisher received him, then withdrew to the adjoining room with the door open. Stephen entered the morning room and stopped when he saw Penelope standing beside the table. Sophia did not come. She has an indisposition. A dry flicker touched his mouth. How grave? Grave enough to postpone 24 hours. Not grave enough to prevent her footman from delivering the message in person. Convenient. Very. Penelope gestured toward the chair opposite. Sit. We need to decide what happens Friday. Stephen did not ask what she meant. The Avilden officer's supper. Yes. He sat. You want to attend? I do. His expression tightened, but he said only, all right. Penelope watched him. You do not approve. That is not the same as refusing. Then tell me what concerns you. Stephen leaned back slightly, considering a goose question rather than reaching for authority. Sophia will have allies there. Horace will control the house. If the conversation turns against you, they will try to make the issue appear social rather than deliberate. That is exactly what I expect. And the steward, he will bring the memorandum if I ask him. Will he give it to you beforehand? No. Stephen looked at her. Penelope continued. It remains with him. He preserved it. He should carry it. If I take possession now, Sophia can suggest I altered it or pressured him. You are right. The immediate agreement no longer surprised Penelope as much as it had yesterday. It did something quieter instead. It made the room easier to breathe in. There are conditions, she said. Stephen's gaze sharpened. Name them. First, the steward brings the original memorandum himself. Agreed. Second, you do not begin the confrontation. A pause. Not resistance. Calculation. Agreed. Third, I question Sophia first. Yes. Fourth, when it is your turn, you do not make this entirely her wrongdoing. Something shifted in Stephen's face. Penelope held his gaze. Your sentence belongs in that room too. He looked away for a moment, then back. Yes, I mean it, Stephen. If you tell them only that Sophia distorted your words, you will allow yourself to become the innocent man whose wife was mistreated by a scheming woman. That is not the truth. His voice was quiet. No, it is not. You spoke the words. You gave them weight. I know. Then say so. I will. Penelope let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Fifth, no threats of prosecution. Sophia did not forge documents or steal property. She manipulated precedents and social influence. The consequence must fit the act. Stephen's mouth hardened. I can think of several consequences that fit. Social ones. I understood you. Did you? Yes. His tone softened. I am learning that I understood you must mean more than I heard the words and will proceed as I wish. Penelope felt warmth rise despite herself. That is progress. A humiliating amount of it has been necessary. Good. Stephen almost smiled. The expression disappeared when she continued. Sixth, you will not tell the room that they must respect me because I am your wife. No. Or because I am Duchess of Chalfont. No. Or because you command it. Penelope. There was the faintest ache in his voice. I know. She stopped. Stephen looked down at his hands. I understand now why that matters. Tell me. He raised his eyes. Because if I make your dignity dependent on my rank, then I can also make it disappear by withdrawing my favor. And that is the very thing Sophia is trying to teach society to believe. Penelope went still. He had understood. Not perfectly, perhaps, not permanently guaranteed, but truly. Yes, she said, that is exactly it. Silence settled between them. Not the strained silence of earlier meetings. Something more delicate. Stephen shifted in his chair, and Penelope noticed the edge of his cuff had folded beneath the sleeve of his coat. The tiny imperfection was absurdly distracting. Stephen Warriner was rarely untidy. Before she could think better of it, Penelope stepped closer. Your cuff. He glanced down. What? It is turned under. She reached toward him, then paused. This time the hesitation was hers. Stephen remained absolutely still. Penelope straightened the cuff with 2 careful fingers, smoothing the linen where it had caught beneath the dark sleeve. The gesture lasted only seconds, yet it felt more intimate than the public arm she had accepted in Kensington Gardens because there was no audience, no etiquette, no reason, except that she had noticed and wanted to correct it. Stephen watched her hand, then her face. You are welcome. Penelope withdrew, but not quickly. For one suspended moment, they stood close enough that she could see the faint tiredness beneath his eyes and the restraint holding the rest of him motionless. He did not reach for her. That made the distance feel chosen rather than imposed. Penelope returned to her chair. There is one final condition. All right. If Friday becomes uncomfortable for you, you do not take control simply because you are ashamed. Stephen absorbed that without defense. That may be the hardest one. I know. I will still do it. Even if Horace mocks you, his jaw tightened. Even then. Even if Sophia says I left because you failed as a husband, if she says it, she will not be entirely wrong. Penelope's heart shifted painfully. Stephen continued, My shame cannot be allowed to become another command. She looked at him for a long moment. Then we understand each other. About Friday. About Friday, she agreed, but they both knew the sentence held more than one meaning. Stephen rose to leave. At the doorway, he stopped. Do you want me here tomorrow when Sophia comes? Penelope remembered yesterday's embrace, the careful way he had waited for her to close the distance. In the adjoining room, she said, only if I call for you. Stephen nodded. Then that is where I will be. Penelope watched him leave and realized that the most convincing evidence of change was no longer what Stephen offered to do. It was what he had begun to accept. He must not do unless she asked. Lady Sophia arrived at Bedford Place the following afternoon, precisely 20 minutes after the hour she had first proposed, as if even delay could be converted into an assertion of control. Penelope received her in Mrs. Frobisher's front drawing-room, where the windows stood open to a mild May breeze, and the tea service had been arranged with deliberate simplicity. Mrs. Frobisher occupied a chair near the hearth with her embroidery in hand. Beyond the open door, in the adjoining morning room, Stephen waited exactly where Penelope had asked him to remain. Sophia knew he was in the house. Penelope saw the knowledge register when the footman announced her, but Sophia's smile never altered. Your Grace, I'm grateful you agreed to see me. You requested the call. Penelope gestured toward a chair. Please sit. Sophia did, arranging her skirts with elegant care. I hope yesterday's postponement did not inconvenience you. Not at all. A headache, nothing serious. I am glad. The civility between them was so perfect that anyone entering at that moment might have imagined affection. Sophia accepted tea, added no sugar, and spoke for several minutes about the weather, a musicale, and the approaching end of the season. Penelope waited. Eventually, Sophia set down her cup. We need not pretend I came to discuss concerts. No. Sophia's eyes sharpened. Then I will be plain. This situation can still be contained. Contained? You are living apart from your husband. The committee meeting became unfortunate. People are talking. But London forgets quickly when given permission. Penelope rested her hands loosely in her lap. And who gives it permission? People like us. That is a generous description of gossip. Sophia's mouth tightened. I'm trying to help you. Then tell me the price. For the first time, Sophia looked almost amused. Very well. Withdraw quietly from the widow's committee until the season ends. Decline a few public engagements. Spend the summer somewhere respectable. By autumn, no one will care whether you and Chalfont occupy separate rooms, separate houses, or separate counties. Mrs. Frobisher's needle stopped. Penelope kept her gaze on Sophia, and in exchange, no one need discuss the marriage further. You mean you will stop discussing it? Sophia's smile cooled. You think too highly of my influence, do I? Silence sharpened between them. Penelope continued. You arranged for me to go in to dinner below you at Avelden House. Sophia's eyes flickered once toward the adjoining room. That was a servant's mistake. The steward says otherwise. The color in Sophia's face changed almost imperceptibly. Penelope did not mention the memorandum. She had no need to reveal every card before Friday. Servants are easily frightened, Sophia said, and easily persuaded when they fear losing a reference. Sophia's fingers tightened around the handle of her cup. Be careful, Penelope. Why? Because you're making an enemy where none is necessary. You made me smaller in a room before my husband ever gave you words to use against me. I'm merely refusing to stay small. Sophia leaned back. And what exactly do you think you have won? Stephen will defend you because of your father. He has always defended you because of your father. You heard him yourself. Protection is not desire. The sentence struck exactly where Sophia intended. Penelope felt the old pain rise, but it no longer arrived alone. Beside it stood everything Stephen had admitted. His fear of mercy, his refusal to use money against her, his open hand on the table, his arms closing only after she chose them. Penelope did not look toward the adjoining room. You mistake me, she said. I'm not asking you to prove my husband loves me. Sophia's brows lifted. No, I'm asking why my marriage interests you so much that you've spent weeks arranging other women's opinions of it. Sophia's composure slipped. Because your position affects rooms I have spent years managing. There it was. Not love, not heartbreak. Rank, influence. Penelope's marriage had altered a social landscape Sophia believed belonged to her. Thank you, Penelope said quietly. Sophia realized too late that she had answered more honestly than intended. She rose. You will regret making this public. Penelope rose as well. Perhaps, but regret is mine to choose. Sophia glanced once toward the open doorway. Stephen did not appear. For a second, disbelief showed plainly on her face. She had expected the Duke. She had expected male authority to end what female composure could not. Penelope saw the realization and understood its value. Good afternoon, Lady Sophia. Sophia curtsied with rigid grace. Your Grace. When the front door closed below, Penelope remained standing. Her hands had begun to tremble. Mrs. Frobisher set aside her embroidery and came close enough to offer comfort without imposing it. You did not need rescuing. No. Penelope swallowed. But I'm glad he was there. Mrs. Frobisher looked toward the adjoining room. Then perhaps you should tell him. She left by the opposite door, granting them privacy while remaining somewhere close within the respectable little house. Stephen appeared only after Penelope said, You may come in. He crossed the threshold and stopped several feet away. His expression was controlled, but not calm. I heard her. I know. When she said your father was the reason I would always defend you, I wanted to open that door. Penelope looked at him. But you did not. You asked me not to. Was it difficult? Yes. The honesty pulled a fragile smile from her. Stephen continued. I also wanted to tell her she was wrong. You did not do that either. No. His voice lowered. I won't make love another argument you're forced to accept because she cornered you. The word love passed between them without becoming a declaration. Penelope felt it anyway. Stephen took one step closer, then stopped. "There's something I want to ask." She did not move away. "Ask." His gaze dropped briefly to her mouth, then returned to her eyes. "May I kiss you?" Penelope's breath caught. Nothing in his posture assumed the answer. He did not reach for her. He simply waited. She thought of every formal touch of their marriage that had happened because custom required it. Every silence that had grown because neither had risked asking for more. Then she said, "Yes." Stephen still did not close the distance. Penelope did. She stepped forward until only inches remained between them, lifted her face, and gave him the answer again, without words. His hand rose slowly to her cheek, pausing long enough for her to turn away if she wished. She did not. The kiss was gentle at first, almost unbearably careful. Then Penelope placed one hand against his coat and felt the restraint in him soften into warmth. There was no urgency to possess, no demand hidden inside tenderness, only recognition. When they parted, she kept her hand where it rested over his heart. Stephen did not move it. For several seconds they stood in silence, closer than they had ever been, while feeling more free. Penelope could feel his heart beating beneath her palm, steady but not untouched, and the knowledge that he was affected without demanding anything more from her carried its own quiet tenderness. "Tomorrow," Penelope said softly, "you still wait until I speak first." Stephen's eyes held hers. "I will. Even after this. Especially after this." Penelope believed him. Outside, a carriage rolled past Bedford Place. Inside, the distance between husband and wife had narrowed, but neither mistook nearness for the end of the work. Still waiting at Avelden House. Avelden House looked almost unchanged on the evening of May 29, which Penelope found more unsettling than if the place had burned to the ground. The same chandeliers cast warm light across polished floors. The same gilt mirrors multiplied rank and silk and uniforms into elegant reflections. The same dining room waited beyond the drawing-room doors for the annual officers' supper, with its silver laid precisely and its place cards arranged according to hierarchy. Yet nothing inside Penelope felt as it had 3 weeks earlier. She entered on Mrs. Frobisher's arm rather than Stephen's. Her gown was deep blue, dignified without spectacle, and the jewelry at her throat was modest and personally hers. Her wedding ring remained beneath her glove. Across the crowded room, Stephen stood speaking with 2 former officers. He saw her at once. Their eyes met. He did not cross to her. He had promised not to begin. Penelope felt the restraint in that distance more clearly than she had once felt his arm beneath her hand. Horace Dacre came forward as host. "Your Grace, Mrs. Frobisher, we are honored." "Thank you, Lord Avelden." His smile was correct, but the strain beneath it showed. Lady Sophia stood near the entrance to the dining room, directing the procession with a confidence so similar to that first evening that the resemblance seemed deliberate. Penelope saw the Avelden steward several yards behind her. He carried a folded sheet of foolscap in one hand, deep central crease, faint wine stain at the lower right corner, the original still in his possession. When Sophia began giving instructions for the order in which guests would go in, Penelope stepped forward. Lady Sophia. Conversation did not stop immediately. It faded in rings, nearest first, then farther away as people sensed a disturbance worth hearing. Sophia turned with a brittle smile. "Your Grace, before we go in to dinner, there is a matter that should be corrected. Surely this is not the moment." "It is exactly the moment. The matter began here, in the order of this house." Horace moved nearer. Penelope, if this concerns the unfortunate confusion earlier this month. It does. His use of her Christian name did not soften her. She looked toward the steward. Would you come forward, please? The man hesitated only once, then crossed the room. Several guests recognized him. Stephen remained where he was. Penelope saw his hands loosely clasped behind his back. He did not intervene. You were responsible for the dinner order on May 7th, Penelope asked. Yes, Your Grace. Did you prepare the original order yourself? I did. And did it place the Duchess of Chalfont beneath Lady Sophia Dacre? No, Your Grace. Sophia's face lost color. Penelope continued. Show us the memorandum. The steward unfolded the same sheet carefully. Lady Westmere, Lady Bexham, 2 retired officers, and several nearby guests leaned close enough to see without taking it from him. Penelope did not touch the paper. Which writing is yours? She asked. The original list, Your Grace, and the later instruction? The steward swallowed. That is Lady Sophia's hand. A murmur moved through the room. Sophia stepped forward. This is absurd. Household arrangements are altered constantly. Penelope looked at her. Then let us be precise. When was that alteration written? Before dinner, Your Grace, the steward answered. Approximately 20 minutes before the company went in. Before the card-room conversation later that evening, yes. Before His Grace made the statement you later repeated to several hostesses and at the Widows' Committee. Yes, Your Grace. Penelope turned to Sophia. If my husband's words gave you permission to diminish me, why had you already done so before he spoke them? Silence descended fully now. Sophia lifted her chin, because I recognized what everyone else was too polite to say. Your position in that marriage was always precarious. Precarious because you wished it to be, because everyone knew why he married. You. Everyone believed a version you helped repeat. Sophia's restraint cracked. You left his house. You proved the marriage was broken. After you had already decided I should be placed below you. Penelope did not raise her voice. You did not respond to scandal. You prepared the humiliation first, and found better language for it afterward. Sophia looked toward Horace. He stepped in quickly. This has gone far enough. My sister made a social error. The steward preserved a working paper. No one disputes that the Duchess should have preceded Sophia. It was corrected that night. And afterward, Lady Westmere spoke before Penelope could. Sophia contacted me before the committee meeting. Lady Bexham glanced at her, then nodded reluctantly, and me. Another hostess near the mantel said, She told me the Chalfont marriage existed only because of Colonel Hollingworth. Sophia turned sharply. I repeated what His Grace himself said. Repeated, Penelope said. Selectively, frequently, and always where my position could be weakened. Horace's expression hardened. You are making ordinary conversation sound like conspiracy. No, Penelope replied. I am calling it what it was, social pressure. Nothing more dramatic, nothing less deliberate. Horace gave a humorless laugh. And are we to pretend Chalfont had no part in creating the impression? I merely asked him what every sensible man wondered. Penelope looked directly at him. You asked whether gratitude to my father could sustain a wife he never desired. Several men near the card tables exchanged glances. One older colonel frowned. I remember that. Another gentleman nodded. So do I. Horace's face tightened. Penelope did not turn towards Stephen. She did not need to summon him. She had said what she came to say. Only then did Stephen move. The crowd parted without instruction. He stopped beside Penelope, not in front of her. The sentence itself was mine. His voice was quiet, but no one missed a word. Sophia opened her mouth. Stephen looked at her once. Do not rescue me from my responsibility by making yourself its only author. Then he faced the room. I said, I only tolerate her for her father's sake. I said it knowing it was cruel. I said it because Avilden mocked what my wife meant to me, and I chose cowardice over honesty. Penelope felt every eye turn toward him. Stephen did not flinch. Colonel Hollingworth never asked me to marry his daughter. He asked only that I ensure she would never be left financially helpless if circumstances turned against her. The marriage was my decision. I asked Penelope because I wanted her. A quiet shock passed through the guests. Stephen continued, I spent years confusing gratitude with debt because debt was easier for me to understand than mercy. I did the same with my marriage. When Avelden used that weakness against me, I used a dead man's sacrifice as armor against feeling, and my wife paid for my cowardice. Penelope's throat tightened, but she kept her shoulders straight. Stephen looked toward her only briefly before returning his attention to the room. Her dignity existed before my defense and survived my failure. No command followed, no demand that anyone honor her because he required it. Penelope stepped forward again. His grace's shame does not create my worth. His truth merely stops obscuring it. The sentence settled more deeply than any threat could have done. Lady Westmere was the first to act. She turned to Sophia. After what occurred at the committee, I cannot support your continuing honorary position. Lady Bexham nodded. Nor can I. Two hostesses nearby exchanged a glance before one said, I will not place future charitable events under Lady Sophia's direction. The second added, neither will I. Horace's face flushed. This is excessive. The steward stood very still, the memorandum folded once more in his hands. Stephen looked at Horace. Your sister blamed a servant for carrying out her instruction. You then threatened his reference. Horace stared at the steward. That was a private household matter. Then and correct it publicly. Horace's jaw worked. Stephen did not threaten law or prosecution. He merely waited. Around them, several senior servants had become visible at the edges of the room. Horace understood the cost of refusing. I was wrong to blame you, he said stiffly to the steward. Your reference will not suffer. The steward bowed. Thank you, my lord. Stephen added, Chalfont House will no longer lend its automatic support to Dacre social ventures. Any future cooperation will be considered individually. Horace looked at him with open anger, but no one in the room mistook the consequence for vengeance. It was withdrawal, not destruction. Sophia's influence had depended upon rooms like this, believing hers indispensable. Tonight, that belief had cracked in public. Penelope did not need to watch it collapse further. She inclined her head to Lady Westmere, then to the steward. Thank you for telling the truth, Your Grace. He kept the memorandum. Penelope turned toward the entrance hall. Mrs. Frobisher joined her. Stephen followed only after a respectful distance had opened between them. Outside, the night air felt cool against Penelope's face. Their carriages waited beneath the lamps. Stephen stopped several feet away. He did not reach for her. Penelope looked at him, at the man who had allowed his shame to become visible without using it to demand forgiveness. Then she placed her hand briefly in his and squeezed once. Stephen's fingers closed around hers for only the instant she allowed. Do you want my carriage? He asked. Penelope released his hand. No. Pain crossed his face, but he accepted the answer. She let one heartbeat pass. But call tomorrow. Stephen called at Bedford Place the next afternoon at 3 o'clock, exactly as Penelope had permitted. and for the first time since their separation, neither of them had a scandal to discuss. That absence felt strange. There was no committee waiting to judge her, no evidence to examine, no hostile drawing room to survive. Only tea, Mrs. Frobisher's quiet presence, and the fact that Stephen had come because Penelope had told him he might. Within days, London supplied its consequences without requiring Penelope to chase them. Lady Sophia relinquished her honorary position with the Widows' Committee. Two hostesses quietly removed Avelden events from their calendars. Horace and his sister withdrew from the remainder of the season under the respectable explanation that family matters required their attention elsewhere. Penelope heard each development and felt satisfaction, but not triumph. She had not wanted Sophia destroyed. She had wanted the truth restored to its proper proportions. More importantly, she no longer wanted her marriage repaired by the same public machinery that had damaged it. So when Stephen called again, they spoke of other things. At first, the conversations were cautious. He asked before joining her for a drive. She invited Mrs. Frobisher to accompany them, and Stephen accepted without disappointment. They drove through quieter London streets, rather than deliberately parading in Hyde Park. Another afternoon he came for tea and stayed long enough to discuss a parliamentary speech, a new painting Penelope disliked, and the absurd habit one mutual acquaintance had of praising every soprano before hearing her sing. Penelope laughed. Stephen stopped speaking for half a second. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. That wasn't nothing." His expression softened. "I missed that." "My criticism of sopranos, your laugh?" Penelope looked down at her tea. 3 weeks earlier, such a sentence might have broken her heart because she would have built too much hope upon it. Now she let it remain what it was. One honest thing. Stephen sent no jewels. He sent no extravagant flowers. He did not fill Bedford Place with gifts intended to make refusal ungracious. Once, he brought a small parcel of oranges after hearing Mrs. Frobisher complain that her usual fruiterer had sent poor ones. Penelope teased him for courting her aunt. Mrs. Frobisher declared that he had finally discovered sound strategy. The ease of that afternoon stayed with Penelope longer than any grand gesture could have. She began visiting Chalfont House by daylight. The first time, she remained less than an hour. She walked through the drawing room, the morning room, and the breakfast room, where her empty chair had first told Stephen she was gone. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt different because she knew she could leave whenever she wished. Stephen did not ask her to stay for dinner. At the door, he merely said, "Thank you for coming." The second visit lasted longer. They ate luncheon together. The third time, she sat in the library while Stephen answered correspondence at his desk. They spoke. Little. The silence did not feel like neglect. It felt companionable. When 4 o'clock came, Penelope stood. Stephen rose with her. "I'll have the carriage brought around." "Thank you." He did not ask when she would return. That restraint became its own form of courtship. He was learning that love could invite without enclosing. Penelope was learning that forgiveness did not require pretending she had never been hurt. By June 19, the decision had become quiet enough that she trusted it. She arrived at Chalfont House shortly before noon, without trunks, accompanied only by Mrs. Frobisher. Stephen came down the staircase as the footman closed the door behind them. He stopped when he saw Penelope's expression. "What is it?" She glanced toward her aunt. Mrs. Frobisher smiled. "I believe I am no longer required for this portion of the conversation." She turned toward the morning room, leaving husband and wife alone in the hall. Penelope looked at Stephen. The house around them was familiar down to the ticking clock and the faint scent of beeswax. "I'm ready to come home." Stephen did not move. The words clearly struck him, but joy did not make him careless. "Because you wish to." Penelope felt something inside her settle. That was the question she needed him to ask. "Only because I wish to." His eyes closed briefly. When they opened, emotion had softened the control she once mistook for indifference. "Then I'll be grateful for every day you choose it." "Do not become too grateful," she said, and a faint smile touched her mouth. "I intend to complain about your habit of leaving newspapers everywhere." Stephen's answering smile was unguarded. "I'll try to survive the criticism." Her belongings would be brought later from Bedford Place. There was no need to turn the moment into a household procession. Penelope asked instead to sit with him privately in the drawing room. They took chairs near the windows, but after several moments Stephen rose. He remained a few feet away, looking more uncertain than Penelope had ever seen him at a ball, in Parliament, or before an angry room. "There is something I have deliberately not said." Penelope's heart began to beat faster. "I know. You do? I hoped." Stephen drew a breath. "Then I should stop making you hope for things I have the power to say plainly." He crossed only half the distance between them. "I love you, Penelope. I loved you before I had the courage to understand what I was asking for. I loved you while I was hiding that love beneath duty, because duty felt safer. I love you now without claiming the answer." Penelope's eyes burned. This time she did not look away. "I love you too." Stephen's face changed with such naked relief that she almost laughed through the tears threatening her composure. She continued before tenderness could erase the boundary that had made their return possible. "But I'll never again live where love must disguise itself as endurance." Stephen nodded once. "Then I'll never ask you to." Penelope stood. He waited. She crossed the remaining space herself, lifted one hand to his cheek, and kissed him first. Stephen answered gently, one hand settling at her waist, only after she leaned closer. The kiss held none of the desperation of reunion, and none of the uncertainty of their first. It was warmer, steadier, and entirely chosen. When Penelope drew back, Stephen did not follow. He merely looked at her as if being allowed to remain near her was enough. Later that afternoon, they took an open carriage toward Hyde Park during the fashionable hour. Penelope wore a pale summer bonnet and carried her father's small book of common prayer in her lap. Its calfskin cover was worn smooth at the edges, the brass clasp still dented, Colonel Hollingworth's initials resting unseen upon the flyleaf. The book had accompanied her from Chalfont House to Bedford Place on the night she left. For years, her father's courage at Waterloo had seemed to stand between every interpretation of her marriage. Stephen had believed gratitude required debt. Society had believed debt explained desire. Penelope herself had once feared that a dead man's sacrifice had purchased her future. Now she looked down at the familiar book and felt only love for the father who had wanted her secure, not owned. She closed the clasp. Then she placed the prayer book safely into the carriage's side pocket. Stephen watched, but did not ask what the gesture meant. He had finally learned that not every silence required him to fill it. As the carriage approached the crowded row, familiar faces turned toward them. Some smiled, some bowed. A few watched with the avid interest of people disappointed that reconciliation looked less dramatic than scandal. Penelope no longer cared what story they preferred. Stephen rested one gloved hand between them, palm open. He did not reach across the space. Penelope looked at it, then at him. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with quiet warmth. The carriage moved forward into the public row, her father's prayer book resting safely beside them, honored but no longer governing the life before her. Penelope had not returned, because a duke had protected her, because society had approved her, or because a dead man's sacrifice demanded gratitude. She had returned because Stephen had learned to choose her without claiming her, and because, knowing everything now, she chose him back.